Alright guys, so this second part of sweat soldering is soldering a strip to a wider strip, for those of you that want to make a band that's like this. So if you're making a band that's double layered, it's easier to solder something on a flat surface rather than making two circles that are concentric and equal to go within one another. So when you come up here, you want to make sure your two pieces of metal are clean, which these are. You want to make sure you have the edges filed and sanded before you do it. And you want to make sure that they're perfectly flat so that they can rest on top of one another. So this is the piece that I'm going to put on the bottom, which is going to be on the inside of my finger, and then this one's going to be on the top. So I've already added a texture to this piece. Once you have it soldered, it's harder to add a texture, so you want to do that stuff beforehand. So if this is my first solder seam, what type of solder should I probably use?
Medium.
Anybody have a guess? If this is my first solder seam and I'm going to do more soldering, what solder should I use? Hard solder. Very good. Okay, so this first one, I have flux on here, and I'm not even going to touch this with the torch at all. I'm going to add that later. All right, so I'm going to put some hard solder in a line, just like when you did your solder seam for your butt joint to make your ring connect. I'm going to put a line of solder that's like a dotted road. And you will have some solder spill out on the edges because this is a pretty, like mine's a pretty thin strip. It depends on what you're doing, but it will be pretty easy to sand off. So this piece does take a little bit longer to heat up because you'll notice it is totally flat on the soldering brick, and it absorbs some of the heat. So once I have enough pieces, I'm going to kind of heat it up, and then I can move the solder to where I want it once that flux is clear. So pay attention to that flux because I feel like that's where some of us get, see how it's going white right now? I can't move the solder. It won't move right now. It's not sticky yet. So once that flux starts to evaporate, see how it's going clear now? Now it's easier for me to adjust my solder, and I can put it where I want it. And I'm just going to hold the torch off for a second, because if I'm holding it on there, I could flow it before I'm ready. And I'm just going to kind of move it to where I want it to be. Straight line, as straight as possible. Now I'm going to try to make that sweat evenly. So once one starts to go, the rest should kind of follow. Okay, did you see that? All right, now for this one, I'm going to quench it, copper tongs in the water, but you're going to notice, can I go ahead and sweat solder that right now? No, I got to put this in the pickle for a couple minutes. It's too dirty, okay? So I would go put that in the pickle, and here it is, clean, ready to go. So if I've sweated this, and I need to attach this to that, what is my first step?
Flux.
I gotta flux it. You always have to add flux. Even if it seems like you already added flux the first time, I want this solder to flow again, so I have to add more flux. So I'm gonna add it to that side, and I'm gonna add it to the other side, just like a PB&J. I'm gonna put it together, and I'm gonna set it up where I want it. Now, I don't have these cut to size yet. I'm gonna cut it after I solder it. So I have it on there. I want to make sure I'm ready that this is on a flat surface because I feel like I'm going to have to push this down a little bit. Now what happens with metal when you add heat to it is sometimes it likes to move and get wavy. So especially a flat piece of metal like that, two pieces, it's going to try to move on you. So I like to have a heavier type of steel tong that I can kind of push on as it's flowing. Just close by in case I need to use that, okay? So I'm going to use a medium torch. I think this is a number 2. Yeah, this is the number 2. And I'm going to focus most of my heat on the bottom piece. Because the bottom piece is, number one, it's bigger, so it's going to take longer to heat up. And number two, it's right against that soldering brick, so it's losing some of its heat. So I'm kind of directing the torch to only really get the bottom piece. And that's kind of challenging, but you'll start to be able to do that. So it's getting pretty red hot, so that's when it's most likely going to flow. And I'm just looking to find the silver coming out from the sides a little bit. See how it's moving a little? And you can probably see the solder starting to come out. And that's... So now I'm going to quench it. And now it's real dirty, so now you really got to put it in the pickle, okay? Now, if it didn't solder all the way, you can always touch it up. You hope that it does it in one try, but sometimes it's hard to do that. So I won't know for sure until I clean it. And that is how you sweat solder a band. Thanks, guys.